Okay, so before the break, we were looking at an extension of what we did with the pathfinding nav mesh agents to move character opponents. Got this thing moving around. I realized during the break I forgot a line. We set our direction and then set the speed. And I meant to take direction equals direction times 6 times that new speed for that temporary change, so that we move in that faster move at that faster speed for a short amount of time. Then body dot velocity equals direction. I forgot those lines before the break, so our character didn't like suddenly move quicker. Okay, yeah, the next assignment, if it gets a little overwhelming, we have a lot of things to do, so get as far as you can. Try to get at least all of the cards drawn and sitting on the and laid out there in the right order. The imagery stuff, because that leads into our next stuff very well. So we have this moving randomly, and now when it's close enough, it suddenly moves quickly towards our character and pushes it. I meant to have that in there and kind of forgot that last little line. So we reset the speed, but we needed to take that speed scalar value multiplied by the new direction so that it suddenly moved quicker towards our character. Kind of skipped that, but we have a lot of stuff to cover, and including some graphic stuff. So a little more graphic stuff now. And I'm going to do the 3D stuff first, which probably might seem a little counterintuitive. It's like when we did the 2D, wouldn't it be easier to start with 2D and add the third dimension? But actually with vector graphics, it's a little easier if we go the other direction and do 3D first. So I'm going to open up Blender and take a look at animating stuff. Make a general file, and this is going to get sent over to Unity. So we don't need a camera and a light, because Unity has a camera and a light we can use. And we need something that we can animate. So I'm going to take a cube here and turn it into a stick man. So what I'll start with is maybe scaling it in the X direction. Whoops. And push S to scale, and then Z, and we'll go make just that nice long body in the Z direction. We can move that up a little. Now we can do some quick editing to make that look like a stick man. So I'll go in edit mode. And here on the bottom, I'll push Control R to add some rings and find the vertical one. Maybe scroll up, get a couple more rings there. That'll probably work. Get a little bit of area to work with. I can maybe select those two bottom faces and then extrude those down. And those need to be legs. So after extruding them, whoops, not like that. I'm putting the little arrows on. So I have a grab spot. After extruding them, I'll hit scale, S to scale, and make them smaller, and then extrude down again. Again, S to scale them down. And that gets us a couple legs. Whoops. Now if I grab them one at a time and kind of move this stuff around so that it looks more like a standing position. I guess I need to select vertices. So I'll select those, kind of move that out, maybe up a little so it's like a knee. Sort of a bow-legged stick man, but sort of a starting point for a leg. Just the that way we can see just the basic ideas. Same thing on this leg. I'll select the stuff there for the knee. I'll move that out. Then stuff down here for the foot and move that out so it doesn't look quite so strange. That worked for a starting point. I'll come up here and hit Control R again to add in a bunch of rings. Something like that'll work. Just to get some spots, and then I'll grab one of those things and extrude it out to be the arm. Bring it out and down, and maybe S to scale it a little bit smaller. Then R, Z, rotate. Well, I'll do this one. Bring it in and rotate around the y-axis so that that's like downward. And now rotate X so that it kind of goes forward, then extrude that down for the other arm. That'll work. Do the same thing over here. Select a face, push E to extrude it, just come out a little ways and bring it down so that it looks like sort of an arm. And now I need that facing somewhat forward. So I'll push R to rotate and then Y so that we only rotate around the y-axis until it's sort of downward. And then R to rotate and X so that face is facing about the direction I want it to face. Then extrude another one here. Oh, whoops. Maybe scale it down because arms get smaller. Now extrude another one and scale that down to match the hands. I'll grab this face and extrude up for a neck. Then this one I will push scale and make it quite a bit bigger and extrude up again to make like a head. So a quickly drawn stick man. Just start with a box and move those vertices and edges and faces around till you get about the shape you want. Okay, that'll work. That's our stick man. I'll go over here and save it as stick man. But you'll notice down here at the bottom, our 3D modeling stuff is intended to move. We usually don't, it's common enough that we want our models to actually be animated. That's one of our default options. It's always just sitting there. And when we animate 3D models, our mesh is really just a skin. So I can go back to object mode and add in a material. We saw this stuff before. Add a new material, wait for Blender to do something. There we go. Call it skin and give it some sort of skin-like tone. That'll probably work. Maybe darker than that. Sure, that's about the color of skin. So there's a little stick man, and really that's the skin of our model. The mesh is the outer part. when we want to animate things, what we do is we give it a skeleton or an armature, and then we can position the armature and the skin just follows along. Kind of like what we are, right? You may have heard the phrase that you don't have a skeleton, you are a skeleton. Severe burn victims kind of make a demonstration. It's very unpleasant, but severe burn victims show that we can live without skin. We could not live for more than a few seconds without a skeleton. So you are a skeleton, and the skin just kind of wraps around and follows where the skeleton goes. Same thing here. We set all our movements up by using an armature. So I added that, and you'll see it showed up over here, call it an armature. And we build a skeleton with these bones, which is kind of hard to see. Notice we have some things down here that give us these green options showed up. That's our, I also call them riggings, but I'm going to use the term skeleton because that's, well, like the little man here. We're going to give him a skeleton and then animate that skeleton. So if we select the bone under viewport properties, we can turn it on and off. Oh, that's not the one I want. Is it over here? Yeah, just a quickly drawn one, a placeholder, because usually for programmers, that's what we need, the placeholder images. We kind of, and our placeholder images, we want to put a little bit of effort into so that so that we know what numbers to give the art department. Like we need something this size and these basic parts. So we can't see the bone. So if we select this little stickman looking icon over here, and under viewport display, you'll see option for in front. That way our bone always shows in front. Where is our bone? Oh, it's really small. So here's the little, the first bone, and we'll build the whole skeleton off that. So that's pretty small. So I'm going to scale that up. Give him a nice big backbone. And then by moving around to different positions, using the middle wheel, I can pan that in different directions and get that first bone about where you want it to go. And then with the bone selected, the armature, if we go in edit mode, we can add more bones to it. So we can click the, notice we can click the end, the whole bone itself, or the other end. So if you select one of the ends and push E again for extrude, it's like we can grow another bone out of that one. Then I'll extrude another one up here to kind of, yeah, I'll do something like that. Oops, meant to click. So kind of growing bones out, one for the backbone, one for the neck. And as you look at it in different angles, you'll notice things might not really seem in the right position and stuff. So just take your time and go around, put everything about where it needs to be. Usually it's best to look straight on so we can see really good angles of where our bones are going. Try to get that about the middle. Get that about the middle. Just kind of want to go over the key idea here. If we look from the side, that probably looks like a good spot for those. Looks about the middle. So then I'll come back to this sort of the top of the backbone, and I'll push E to extrude something for an arm. So like a shoulder, then E to extrude, get a forearm, upper arm, and a lower arm. And as we do this, we build up a skeleton. Oh, I think I want to look at this side. And you notice it sometimes takes a lot of back and forth to find the right positions and just kind of spin around and get those joints between the bones about where they would go for that skeleton. I'll come back and do the same thing over here. Extrude a little shoulder, extrude a upper arm, then extrude a lower arm. And then as we spin around, grab each one of them and try to get it in a position that looks like a good spot to control that part of the skin. Move this down and up, which really means the joints and the skeleton roughly line up with your thing there, kind of centered in there. That'll work to get the concepts. So here I'll come down here and extrude a bone down for like a pelvis, then extrude an upper leg, extrude a lower leg. That'll work. Come up here, extrude a bone for pelvis. I'm just pushing E for extrude, and then bring all the bones out, and then just kind of spin around and put them in the place they need to be. So this would be about the bottom of the leg. This joint here should be the knee, which means this one probably needs to come a little ways forward. And notice how both of those, the skin and then the skeleton, were made from one object itself. There's not lots and lots of objects put in there. Started with just one single object, and that way we only have one skeleton. We don't have a whole bunch of different things we need to deal with. Maybe move this one forward. So if I switch to wireframe mode, you can see there's that skin is just kind of wrapped around that skeleton. And once we get the positions we want, then we can pose that skeleton in different positions. And all we really need is the starting and ending position. So to like wave, we'd have our arms by our side, and then we'd say lift the arm up here, and the computer can fill in all those spots in between. So it makes animations very straightforward. So I'm gonna go back to object mode, and the order on this next step makes a difference. Actually, the order on the next few steps makes a difference. So watch your menus to make sure you're going in the right order. So if we select the skin, so the mesh, which started as the cube, but probably a good idea to label those, then hold shift and select the skeleton afterwards. We can push Control P, and notice how we can set the parent. So the first object selected will be the child of the second object selected. So the order matters. We can set it to the object with some transforms. What we want is Armature deform. And there's different ones. We can assign all of it ourselves, or automatic weights is probably what you want to use to start off with. Actually, automatic weights has gotten pretty good in Blender. So that's usually going to work for the 3D stuff. So select the mesh, which is going to be the child, and then select the skeleton, which will be the parent, and Control P as in parent, and choose Armature deform with automatic weights. So now I'll deselect everything. I'll select the skeleton, and you'll notice over here we have a new option we didn't have before. We have pose mode. Whereas on our mesh, there's no pose on things. So selecting the skeleton, which sometimes it's easier to select from over here. Notice how now it shows that skin is just a child of the skeleton that we have to expand. So if we go in pose mode and select one of our bones, maybe this one, I'll push R to rotate. And notice when that moves, the skin moves with it now. Usually we want to be very controlled with our movements. So we push R to rotate and then maybe X so that we only rotate around the X axis. So we can only move back and forth and little things like that. Then you'd want to go through here and check your bones one at a time. Make sure they seem to be controlling the right part of skin. So if we move, then go to the forearm instead of the upper arm, rotate that. Seems to hold just about the right amount. Rotate our forearm over here. And check one of our legs maybe. Rotate this. Looks like it's only moving the leg. It's not doing weird things like moving part of the chin or something. And I'll push escape to undo that movement. From this angle, it looks like my position might have got off there. Looked like that was about outside of the leg, but when I move it, it only affects the skin. So that's the part that matters. So you'll just go through and check all of your bones like that one at a time. This one, I tilted this a little forward so that hopefully if we rotate RZ to rotate around the Z axis, yeah, it looks like the head's turning. So now we can set up some animations. And to do that, notice there's this tab here for animations. So after you get those set, oh, I guess one other thing to show. If we go back in object mode and things aren't quite working, didn't quite work out, if you select the skeleton and then the mesh, the order is important. Notice we select the skeleton first, then the mesh, we get the menu here for the mesh. But if we select the other way and select the mesh, then hold shift and select the skeleton second, this gives us the skeleton mode. So the last one selected is the one we get the menu from. So if you select the skeleton and then the mesh, one of your options for the mesh is weight painting. So this shows how much, where the skin is affected by a particular bone. So right now we're down here at the lower leg bone. So it's color coded. So the red is highly affected and then it fades down to blue. So if I hold shift and select this bone, up here the head is affecting that skin. Hold shift and select another bone. You have to hold shift as you select the bones one at a time. Shift and click to select that bone. We can see what it is. And if you need to change it, we can just kind of paint stuff on. Like, oh, maybe this should be affecting the right hand over here too. So we come over here and just do click, and then we can paint that part as a movement. So if we go back into pose mode, object mode, then select our armature, and we go in pose mode. When we move this bone, that other arm moved with it, which probably isn't what we want. I just wanted to show the weight painting thing. So to remove those, again, select the armature first, and then the mesh, and you go in weight paint. And if you need to remove something, notice up here in our upper left corner with our controls, we're drawing some weights on. The size we're affecting, the strength, how strong it is, but the amount of weight is all the way up to 1. So if we turn that all the way to 0, then it becomes an eraser. Then we can go through and paint a weight of 0, which is not connected at all to the spots that should not be there. So it takes a little while to get everything set up. Start with the automatic weights. Those are pretty good anymore. So we can adjust stuff. But from that check, it looked like the bones were in place. As I spin around, it looks like this foot bone got in wrong, but it connected to the right skin, so that'll be okay. There's different options, but when you're ready, you go over to the animation tab. This has a lot of the preset tools we need. A preview mode, because the bones are only a create. The bones, we only work with those when we're creating them, right? We don't want to see those in the animation, so we can see our animation over here with the way it will render in the game when we get there, or turn the visibility off on them here. And you down here, you'll see this bottom one's set to a dope sheet. You want to change that to an action editor. The action editor allows us to animate more than one, to create more than one animation. Because notice now we have a new button. Yeah, what's that? Did somebody ask a question? Okay, I guess not. I heard somebody go off mute for a minute, so I thought there might have been a question. So go to the animation tab, and down at the bottom, make sure you're set to an action editor. You'll know you're in the right place because you'll have a new button here, like we can add multiple animations. So create new, we'll call, I'll do a waving first. I mentioned that, that's an easy one. So create the new one, give it a name. And this little shield thing here, if I hover, it says fake user. Some optimization compiler things will try to remove animations that aren't attached to this stuff. So we want to keep those, we don't want an optimizer removing that at some point. So make sure you click that shield so that it has a fake user. And if you click the little drop down here next to the name of it, you'll see the list of all your animations. You want to make sure there's an F beside any of them. So otherwise optimizers might adjust it. And what we do is we set up important frames. So I'll make waving like a, I don't know, 20 frames sounds good. So down here, you'll see we have a start and an end point. So I want this to be a 20 frames long. I'll scroll in, the middle wheel scrolls in and out, and clicking the middle wheel does panning on this stuff. So what we have to do is set up some keyframes so the things will loop. Or then the keyframes are the ones that we definitely want. So our starting frame, we're going to start with the character's arms are down by his side. So I'll push up here in the thing. If you push A, it will select everything, which we're in object mode. We do have to go to pose mode. So select your skeleton and switch to pose mode. And now push A to select all of the bones. So that's our starting position. So I want to make that a keyframe. So now I'm going to push I as an insert, and stick a keyframe for the transform data of those bones. We're going to lock every one of those location, rotation, and scale information in place here. And then this is a loop. I'll move over here somewhere. There's no moving, but if I move over here and run it, you notice when we get to 20, we go back to 1. So it's just a 20 frame animation that's going to keep looping. So what I like to do to make sure everything runs smooth is I'll go 1 past the loop. So we go 1 to 20 and then reset. So to make sure it lines up, I'll go one frame past the end. And once again, make sure everything's selected. So put your mouse up here in this area, push A to make sure you have all the bones selected, and then I, and lock those keyframes in place again. So now our first frame and last frame are set in place. And I always like to do that last frame a perfect match to the first frame, one after where the loop goes back over. So that way we don't have any duplicates and everything should be lined back up like it was ready for that next frame, but we go back to the beginning. So then we can start waving. So what I'll do is, somewhere a little before halfway, 7 sounds good. And that much, I'm gonna take the first 7 frames to raise the arm. So I'll come up here and select this bone, and I'm looking down the y-axis. So to raise that up, I need to rotate around the y-axis. So I'll push. Something I've found over the years is it's good to position your mouse first. So I want a good, like, some leverage to move that, right? If we continue a straight line out from where that bone is now, and then click rotate, we have that nice extra leverage. So our mouse has to move a long way for a little movement on the bone. So I like to position the mouse and then push R for rotate, and then Y, because we only want to rotate around the y-axis, and lift that upper part out a little. But maybe move it forward. So R, X, so it comes up and forward. And at the same time, the forearm will rotate around the X-axis so that it comes up even more. So then we're in our position for our wave. Maybe R, Y, bring that outward. So notice how I just moved out that bone, moved the bones one at a time and one axis at a time to be very cautious about that movement, and got the first frame of the wave, right? To wave, we raise our arm up and then we start moving back and forward. So we need to do that. So first off, we raise our arm and put those bones in place, and the skin just comes along with it, which is really what our bodies do anyway, right? The muscles put the bones in place and everything else just follows where the bones are. So once we have that arm in place, I'm going to push A to select all the bones, and then I to insert a keyframe to lock that keyframe in place. So now if we go back to the beginning and run it, see that it raises his arm like he's waving. The first part of a wave, because we need the other part of the wave. Maybe a couple frames later, I'm gonna take this one. Whoops. Somehow I got off to a different animation. I don't know how that happened. I put those on the wrong thing. Okay, somehow I put those on the wrong thing. So I need to rename these. So a couple frames later, I'm going to have the other part to the wave. So I'll select this front arm and rotate that around the y-axis so it's like over here. Maybe lift the back arm up a little more. Again, rotate Y, get around that particular axis. That'll work. So select everything and insert a keyframe to lock all those bones in place. A few frames later, just click it a few frames later, and I'll grab the forearm again. And rotate that around the Y. Oh, something went wrong there. Undo that. Rotate X. bring it back up, then rotate Y to come back over. That's probably good. Just looking at the steps here. So A to select all the bones, and I to set a spot where they're locked in place. So now if we go back to the beginning, the computer will fill in all those gaps between that. And see the skin just follows along where we set the bone. So obviously something you're going to want to practice it a little with. That looks good. So I'm going to stop that. Set a fake user here. And somehow the names got off. So give that a different name. Notice how there's nothing assigned to this other one. We have more than one animation. Switch back here and can run that animation. Now if we go to the other one, is it R? No. Alt. Okay, so now to do our next animation, if we want to go back to the starting point, when you're in pose mode, you can push Alt R that for reset and move all the bones back to their original positions. Let's try a walking animation. So I'll grab like maybe this upper, whoops. First I'll set our start and end points. So again, at frame 1, select everything and insert a keyframe to lock it in place. Maybe this one I'll do, I'll leave 20 frames here again. 20 frames will work. So again, I like to go one spot past the end to match the first frame. And that way it comes back around smoothly. Then somewhere in between, this isn't going to be the best looking walk. Just because it takes a while to cover this. So we're going to just get the concepts down, and then y'all can kind of mess around with it some, get used to it. So I'll select this bone, and I want to bend this bone up forward like he's walking. So I'll put my mouse out a little ways to get a nice lever. So the mouse has to move a long way to move the bone just a little. And I'll push R, then X to rotate around the X axis. Bring the upper leg forward and the lower leg, again, R, X, sort of downward. At the same time, well, pay attention to the way you walk, right? When your left leg goes forward, your right arm goes back. So as that left leg goes forward, the right arm, RX, needs to rotate backwards. And there is that big connection. So when we move the upper arm bone, the lower arm bone follows suit. So this is happening. Our right leg will kind of go the other way. So RX to rotate backwards around the X axis, and lower leg RX, move it back a little. And while the right leg is backwards, then the right arm goes forwards. So RX and swing it forward just a little. That'll work. This isn't going to be the best walking animation. But once again, push A to select all, I to insert a keyframe, and we'll set the transform for every bone there. And then we'll come somewhere about somewhere, split it up, and kind of do the rest, do the exact same thing the opposite way. So I'm going to push Alt R to reset everything, Option R on a Mac, but I think Mac users are probably used to that. So that first one, our left leg went forward. So this time I'm going to move the left leg backwards. So RX, spin it back along the X-axis, and then grab the lower leg, RX, and like it's kind of the lifted one. Yeah, this probably isn't going to look like the best walk, but we're just taking our first look at the movements. And then what we did with the other one, the upper leg goes forward, and then the lower one, RX, kind of spins down so that the foot's on the ground as this is happening. And if the right leg is forward, then the right arm is going to swing backwards. Which is different when we're running. So pay attention to your own movements or watch some really good runners. RX. The way our arms and legs relate to each other is different between a walk and a run. So even if you're, that's why we can, right? You can look at somebody and immediately tell whether they're walking or running or jogging, even if they're jogging at a walking pace. They're not, it's not the same move, it's not the same movements. That'll work. So once again, select all and insert a keyframe. So now if we go back to the beginning, probably not the best looking walk. Yeah, that pause in the middle is throwing everything off there. So I'm going to take off that second keyframe. But see how easy it is to make the animations there? So I'm going to go over here, select this, and if I right click, we can delete keyframes. But you want to be careful to make sure you only remove the selected ones. I think if I do that, right click, delete keyframes. Nope. Well, it'll be fine. You want to be careful that you don't delete all of your keyframes. That's a really easy thing to do. So what is this? This is front. So that gives us a couple animations. Maybe one more easy one. Be prepared to undo and start over and give it a few tries. Once you get that skeleton in there, you'll just move that around and position it. I'll do maybe one more. So right over here is the new action button. So I'll click new. I don't want to call it running. I'll call it looking, just because I already set up some bones for some movements for it. Let's get back to frame one. Oh, select all the bones, and notice how that inherited everything from running. All of those are already showing up. So I'm gonna go into the looking animation and push A down here to select all of those keyframes. And right click and delete those keyframes. So you notice now looking doesn't have any keyframes where he's running and oops. Oh, waving. I thought I renamed that. So looking, running and waving have keyframes, but looking doesn't have any keyframes left. So you want to make sure and go kind of slowly and carefully, be prepared for mistakes, undo, remember Control Z, the normal undo button, as you get used to it. And it does take a little bit of practice. So I'll push Alt R to reset all the bones. And let's see, we're in frame 1. So I insert a keyframe there. Frame 21. So one past where it's going to reset for the loop. I'll insert sort of a reset keyframe. And I'll come a few frames in. And he's going to look. So I'll bring his arm up here, like shading from the sun. So somewhere around here, it's like this needs rotated around the x-axis till it's way up here like this. This needs rotated around the y-axis. Bring it way over here. Rotate X a little more, bring that up there. The arm's not long enough, but that'll work for now. So I'll bring the arm up, insert a keyframe, and then maybe somewhere over here, I'll grab that bone controlling the head and get to where there's a good angle and rotate that around the Z so that he looks over to the right. Select all of them, insert a keyframe. And somewhere over here. Grab that head bone again. Is that the head? Yeah. And R Z, so it only rotates around the Z axis, and look the other way. Select all the bones, insert a keyframe. Yes, yes. You can select more than one. You want to be careful selecting more than one. This is definitely something you have to be very patient with. But when things go together, like I was asking the chat room, can rotate them together. So if you're blocking the shade, you can do that. And yes, which actually, rotating the head, I just realized is an inaccurate way to look, because when I did the gesture, I'm actually rotating at the top of my pelvis. I'm not turning my neck. So you want to think about things like that. Was that Jacob that asked? Yeah. So it's possible, but stop and think for a moment and see if there's a better way to do it. Because when I went through that gesture, I realized that to do that, I'm actually moving from the top of my pelvis. So moving this bone, rotating this bone way down here would have that same effect and turn the whole body to look, but that would require redoing this animation. And I was just wanting to show the main steps here on how we do this. So raise the arm up, look over, and we get that. You see, we just choose a few key positions, and then the computer fills in the rest of them. That'll work. So I'm going to pause this. click the shield to make sure there's a fake user for it. Yeah, I'll do this. So I'll save. So right now, the looking animation is there. I'm gonna jump over to Unity and show you something real quick. Come back over to Unity, and we saw before that we can just drag a thing in. So this is where that problem with the dragging the Blender file shows up. If I drag it in and then expand it, there's an armature, there's a scene, but if I preview the scene, all we have is the looking animation. The other ones aren't there anymore. So that's when we have multiple animations, that's when we really need to do that FBX export, because an FBX export will bring all our animations with it. So come back over here. Oh, and now that we're done, the little eyeball over here in the hierarchy, and the hierarchy in Blender's by default on the other side. That little eyeball, we can click that and turn the skeleton off. So then we just have our skin. And I'll save that. And under File, Unity actually works with our FBX format. So we want to do the FBX export. We have set up all those different actions. So we go to FBX and get this out of the way. Looks like I'm in the right folder. What do we want to export? Remember, Unity is going to have a camera and a lamp, so we don't need those. We definitely want the armature, the mesh. I meant to just do all of that. So File, export. Oh, those zoom thumbnails are just like always in the way. File, export, FBX. Get the thumbnails on my way again. So really what you want to do is the object types that you're going to export, just make sure you only have the ones in your scene that you need, like the armature and the mesh. That's all we really need. Set your scale. We're going to Unity, which means our Z will be forward. Negative Z forward, Y up. So that's the Unity settings. Down at the bottom, you'll see bake animation, all bones. Make sure the bake animation is checked. So we have those. If you're looking at armature, you kind of make sure everything's set up right. The big thing is make sure you only have the stuff you need to export. And make sure bake animation is selected. And then we should get all of our animations with that. So I'll export that. And now if I go over to Unity and drag in that FBX file, or you can right click and do import asset. Now you'll see there's all three animations come with it. So we have our looking still, and we have our running. And then we have our waving, along with our our armature and our cube. So now if we made an object out of this, just because we're running short on time, I believe this is probably shown up for everybody somewhere in Unity. In order to control an animation, we have to have the animation, and we need an animator controller. So we need both of them. So if I just bring this in and stick him here way above all the rest of our stuff. Here's the camera. Rotate this around so we can see that stuff in the camera. That'll work. Actually, probably the other way. There we go. That way we can see the animations with the camera. To our object, we do have to have an animator controller. So this new oops. So attach an animator controller, and then we'll need that to control our different animations. If we go to Window, and there's an animator pane. So here's what this animation, this controller can handle. Oh, one other thing. If you come over here, notice that the loop is turned off by default. So before you start animating things from the FBX, by default, looping is turned off. So click Edit, and then select that checkbox for loop time and apply it. So on our running animation, we definitely want it to loop. So select it in the assets, click Edit, and hit the checkbox for loop time. So that way it keeps looping. Same thing for the last one. Edit, select looping, and then you'll see there's lots of other controls that you probably want to read through when there's more time than we have left in class this evening. And which one do I want? I want running. Then we use our animator controller to jump between these different things. We're very short on time, so we will pick up from there next time. Has everybody seen animator controllers before? I think most of you all either had me for SDEV 148 or Zach up in Indy for SDEV 148, and I'm pretty sure he did the animations in Unity as well. This just changes shows which animation we're using. It controls that. So when we start the game, we'll go to our running animation, and then we'd set up stuff in the code to switch to the waving or the looking, depending on probably a key press. So we run our game. You can see it starts by just constantly looping goes right to that running animation and loops forever. If I switched and made looking our default one, set that as the default one, now when we run, you see by default, he's just going to sit there and do that looking animation over and over and over again. Same thing for waving. Set as the default layer, run our game. And he just repeats that, and notice that we have some stuff over here, just like we can control our game while it's running and check the values and all that. We can do that with our animation as well. I'm going to leave running as the main one, and we have different sets, right? Like that looping has clearly need 60 frames per second is way too much for that looking animation, right? So we have individual control over each one, things like that. Going to start looking at those. I mostly wanted to go over the idea of skeletal animations, and then and you have to do an FBX export. So in the 3 minutes we have left, a quick recap. We draw our mesh, right? We saw that before, move those vertices around into the right position. Then we give it a skeleton. Make the skeleton the parent of the skin. The mesh is the skin, the skeleton is the actual thing we can control. Then we go over to the animation tab and switch under action editor. We have a new button so that we can add lots of actions, and each action being its own animation. And then one at a time, you put the bones into the position they need to be and set a keyframe, which push I to insert a keyframe and lock the bones into that transform with position, rotation, and scale, and do the important parts. And then the computer will fill in the gaps in between. Afterwards, make sure you do the FBX export. The skeleton doesn't show in FBX, but it's always a good idea to turn it off. We can see things a little bit better. Export is an FBX, and make sure this checkbox that says bake animation is checked. And then you will get all of your animations you set up. Something that takes a little bit of practice, but there's a quiz in next week's homework assignment that has a couple simple animations. We can also do things like growing and shrinking, and we have a building. It makes a nice collapse for a building, right? Give a building a skeleton and then have keyframes where it's all upright and standing nice, and then go knock all those bones, which are more like framework for a building, down, and then the skin for the building is going to follow suit, and it'll look like a collapsed building, and get animations like that. So we can set keyframes for all of that stuff and do adjustments. You can also adjust the mesh manually, and just like if you wanted something to get bigger, you draw the initial one and then set your keyframes for the scale of the mesh instead of rotation of bones like we were doing. The same logic applies there. You're just doing it with the mesh instead of the bones, but something that takes a little bit of practice. We're going to look at this some more, and doing 2D animations follow suit with that. So it's actually a little harder with 2D because we can't have the full idea of the movement. But it looks like we're out of time. I was hoping to have a few minutes finish a few minutes ago, obviously. Something complicated. I will send that stickman out in an announcement right after class, so you can follow that along with that that Unity example that we put together, so you have that basic reference. But also, obviously, when we're not restricted to a very short class period like we are here, you're going to want to spend a lot of time playing around with that, expanding those selection structures for that movement stuff. Spend a lot more time refining the movement of the skeleton and getting the animations down. But it definitely takes practice, so you're going to want to try to work some time in to practice on that. So to make some time, get as far as you can in this module's assignment, that card game, because that one went forever, and then move on to the other stuff, because the other stuff is very important. We don't want to spend a whole lot of time on, we don't want to spend more than necessary on that Unity export stuff. Get as far as you can as the time allows, because there's a lot of stuff to cover still. And I will be very, very generous when I apply the grading. As long as you're doing something, as long as you're getting practice, make sure you put most of your effort needs to go into the final project. Keep that in mind. This is the first time this class is run, so there's obviously some confirmations that need done on the plan, right? Like how much can fit into this class, because it's a very time-consuming thing. But we already ran out over time tonight. It's 8:51. Does anybody have any questions before we go? Okay, in the chat room, skip the book, keep the lectures. I had a similar thought, because some of those go on for a long, long time, and it's a lot easier when we're doing our own thing. Copying an example makes it hard, especially when a bug shows up, because you might not know what you copied every time. We will pick up from there on Monday. If anybody has any questions, we can stick around and do that after the video. Otherwise, y'all have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.